Welcome, everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. This week, we have a very special show in store for you. We're interviewing Marty Rosenblatt, who is a remote viewer and scientist. And I'm just going to turn it over to him and let you explain a little bit about who he is and what he does. Over to you, Marty.
Okay. Thank you, Melody. It's a pleasure to be here, so to speak. Look, my background, as a child, I was always interested and still interested in science fiction type things. Isaac Asimov, Heinlein, Bradbury, those kind of writers, which tended to me to think about the future and very broadly about things that might be possible that weren't currently possible. I am educated as a physicist. I've got a master's degree in physics from UCLA, basically doing predictions using current models with computers, the state-of-the-art computers at the time. I focused on high energy stuff, things like meteorite impacts. We did work for NASA. Meteorite impacts, small ones on spacecrafts, big ones on the planet Earth. Also a lot of focus on nuclear weapons effects. What happens when a nuclear burst goes off? What happens, there's a big nuclear cloud. We used to predict those sorts of things. The size of the crater that a nuclear burst might form. This was all during the Cold War, if you remember those days.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been doing predicting using current models my whole professional career. But I always had interest in things like predicting the future. What is this consciousness stuff all about? Now, it turned out, because of my connections with the Defense Department, I was involved with DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and in the early 1970s, a paper came out by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ from the Stanford Research Institute. And they, in fact, invented this term, remote viewing. Back in those days, I mean, even today, I suspect, if you were to say psychic phenomenon to the government, you could never get a contract. So they had published a paper on their work, which was just fascinating because it was the first full-up scientific study I had ever seen that demonstrated remote viewing both in present time, seeing at large distances, the other side of the earth, as well as precognition, seeing into the future, was in fact happening and could be measured. So I went to the DIA and said, gee, you guys really need to look at this. I mean, this could obviously be important to you. Well, it turned out they were funding it. But they sent me off to Stanford Research Institute to meet Puthoff and Targ. So in the early 1970s, I met these guys. I mean, the paper was impressive. They're impressive. And that was how I really got introduced to this thing they called remote viewing. Now, again, they couldn't say it was psychic, but it's very closely related to things like clairvoyance, clear vision of things away from where you are now, using your mind, using your consciousness. And the military used this for about 20 years. There is a very good book, and let me get it. It's called Remote Viewing. I have it here. Hold on one second, because I want to give you the exact title, and I'll even give you their definition. Okay, this is an excellent book for people who want more details than I'm going to be able to give. But the book is called Remote Viewers, The Secret History of America's Psychic Spies. So the Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, virtually all of the important government agencies, including drug enforcement agencies, during this 20-year period, used the remote viewers. And all of this was highly classified. In the 1990s, it was declassified, but only portions of it were declassified. So there's a lot of information that is now available, and a lot of the members who were in the original group are out and about. In fact, I've given workshops with Russell Targ, and one of the best remote viewers in the world, Joe McMonagle, and I are teaching a workshop, webinar conference we're having in New Orleans at the end of June, and where we actually teach this and then apply it. So let me, okay, I guess I'll keep going.
That's fine. One thing I wanted you to ask you, though, was, can you tell the audience, my audience is really used to me having people on like myself who are natural psychics or tarot readers or astrologers. What is the difference between remote viewing and just sort of a psychic reading?
Okay. Now, a psychic reading usually is about the details of a person. Remote view, and you can use remote viewing for that, but in fact, let me read the definition from this book, and it's pretty much a definition that you'll find around. If you Google remote viewing, you'll get hundreds of thousands of entries. But here's a definition from this book. Remote viewing is a mental faculty that allows a perceiver, who's called the viewer, to describe or give details about a target that is inaccessible to normal senses due to distance, time, or any kind of shielding. So any distance, in fact, the great example is one of the best remote viewers viewed Jupiter before we had a spacecraft that went there. But by target, we don't usually mean a person, though sometimes it's a person, but the way it's normally used is to focus on a location. And you might ask about a location where, say, a missing person is. Describe that location. Joe McMonagle does a lot of that. And I'm sure some of these other techniques that you're talking about do that as well. One of the key differences is that remote viewing is always done within a well-defined protocol, which different people have somewhat different protocols, but given a tasker who is asking a question within the protocol that the tasker defines, the remote viewer then is given minimal information, often just a coordinate, a series of numbers or letters, which is meaningful to the tasker, because the tasker associates that. In the military days, for example, the tasker might associate a coordinate with a building in the Soviet Union in those days that had all kinds of military activity around it, was closely guarded, and they wanted to know what was inside. So they would then ask a remote viewer, just by giving them that coordinate, to describe and sketch what's going on inside this building. Now, that would be what the tasker would write down associated with that coordinate. The remote viewer then would give a written, sometimes they would record what he had to say, and all of this would be provided than to the tasker. Sometimes they were short, sometimes they were 30, 40 pages, sometimes they would stop and pick it up the next day during the military days. But the viewer would be totally blind to anything that was going on. And so within this protocol, then they would sometimes be given feedback, but the tasker would always keep extraordinarily good records and do analysis on it. And this would be done over and over and over again, so you could build up records of different viewers, what they would do well in one area versus another, say. Now, in many ways, maybe that is similar to what a lot of the psychics would do. Maybe you would use tarot cards or something if you were asked a question, but usually you're given more information than being totally blind, as I understand the way most psychics work.
Yeah, I'm an intuitive psychic, and that's definitely the case. Unless I'm doing something like there's a technique where if a person has a yes or no answer, or there are two choices, actually, even better, there are two choices. They can move to New York City or they can move to California. I will read for them, and I will tell them to think about one or the other answer, preferably flipping a coin, because people have a tendency to pick whatever they want first.
Right.
And so you flip a coin. I don't know which way I'm reading. I'm just looking at the energies around whichever choice they've mentally made. And so I will tell them, this looks really good, or this looks really bad, or this looks kind of doesn't matter. There's nothing particular. And then we'll flip it around and do it the other way. And then they don't tell me to the end, which sounds to be kind of like your feedback. Then they tell me which one was which.
Okay, well, that's interesting, but you can see it is different. Here,
it is different.
From the perspective of the psychic, and almost all of them, and us, I'm the same way. Because I do this in a way we'll talk about a little later, which is called associative remote viewing. But that involves the remote viewing, just as we're talking about. I prefer, and virtually all the remote viewers prefer, to have what we call no front loading. We want to get into a quiet place, and I don't know if you do anything similar to a what in the remote viewing world is called a cool down, where you get quiet. It's a little bit like a meditation. You get rid of the day-to-day stuff that's going on in your mind, and you get into kind of a consciousness psychic zone, I suppose, where you're now open to receiving information, because you're now, through your what I call a subconscious, through your subconscious, you're receiving information based strictly on this coordinate, which of course is attached to the tasker. I also very clearly believe it's attached to the feedback, but here you are getting ready to do your remote viewing session, and you open yourself up to all the information that is relevant. And of course, stuff comes in, and that's what you write. That's what you write down. So remote viewing is done differently than these other techniques. And yet I have a feeling there are all kinds of psychics out there that have their own techniques that they would use for gathering information. But this is how it's done in remote viewing, and it was done this way for 20 years, and it's still done this way. I mean, there's a whole community of us that use remote viewing. But it's always within a specific protocol. We always keep detailed records. That's what makes it scientific. So, you don't make a prediction. You don't make 20 predictions, and then you only report 2 or 3 of them. Every one of them is part of the record.
Now, I have another question, and that is, do you only do this for, like you were talking about, like going and seeing something in real time, like a Russian installation? Or obviously this does do future, because you mentioned that, but does it do future, past, present, past as well, basically?
Yes, it can do the past. It can do present time. They're great examples of all these things. My interest is in the future, in precognition, because, well, many reasons. First of all, it's absolutely real. That's been proven in the scientific literature. Stanford Research Institute published that study way back when, but it's been reproduced by Princeton University. A group in Princeton University reproduced it. It's been reproduced many times in different fashions. We've done so much work. The odds now of all of those studies taken together are billions to one that all we could be having are chance results. So the fact that precognition is real, but you see, it's not perfect, nor is any kind of remote viewing perfect. And I bet you would be willing to say there are no psychics out there that are perfect 100% of the time. And it's learning how to live with that kind of uncertainty that is our biggest challenge. And I say our by those of us who really recognize that there are information channels which are not accepted by the current scientific paradigm.
I'm so glad. So sorry, just to interrupt a second. I'm so glad you said that about not always being right, because without naming names, I've been on panels interviewing a couple of the other remote viewers, and they sometimes have seemed as if they cannot be wrong. And this concerned me because I know I'm not always right.
They do great damage to the remote viewing field, and I know some of the people who you're talking about, and they do great damage to other psychics, and they do great damage to our getting to the place where the way this actually works is going to be discovered. Because what we're doing now with precognition and we are applying it, if you will, for real, to gain wealth, and I do want to talk about that, is really primarily to wake up society and the scientific community to the reality of this. Science refused to accept it because there is no model that can explain this. And precognition happens to be my focus because as a scientist, I recognize that shakes up the current scientific paradigm. In fact, it shakes it up so much that's one of the reasons most scientists refuse to accept it. If you talk to most scientists about this, well, for one, you can't talk to them for very long, because they say, you're crazy. There's something wrong. You try to show them that there's data, and they say, there's got to be something wrong with it, because they simply don't believe it. And there's no way they can bring it into their current mindset.
Well, in my completely unscientific sample of my group of friends, I do have to say, though, that among the hard scientists who are more open to this seem to be physicists. And I think you mentioned in some of your literature that I was reading that there may be something about entanglement theory or something that makes this easier, possibly for some physicists to accept.
And that's right. And many of us who give these workshops and we publish things and stuff like that, that part of the scientific community. And there are some very well-known scientists who are pushing this. As you say, the ones who are most open and have taken the time to look at the literature on it. And the best theory we have is connected to quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics, one of its fundamental principles is this concept of entanglement, which basically says in the simplest terms that once things are connected, they're always connected, and basically connected instantly. That was something which Albert Einstein actually fought up until he died. He never quite believed that you could entangle particles instantly. Okay, this one is really interesting. So let me give you an example of this, because he was proven wrong. And there weren't very many times when Einstein was proven wrong. If you take light waves, they're called photons, and they start out together, and you send them off in opposite directions. So they're going in opposite directions, both of them at the speed of light. Einstein would say that if you tweaked one of these, okay, did a measurement on, say, let's call it polarization, but you did a measurement on one of them, the other one could never really know about it because it's moving away too fast. Well, it turns out, and they've done experiments over and over and over again, and so science now accepts the fact that if you tweak one of them, the other one knows about it instantly.
Wow, that's amazing.
That is amazing because it has so many implications in terms of the way we are connected. Because this is how consciousness can connect up with the past and the future. Things are all connected. And they're and notice this is information. What this is all about is information. It isn't like this says that you can go back in time physically. The physical world still follows the physical laws as we know them, but they include the laws of quantum mechanics. And on the macro scale, you can't do that as far as we know. But in terms of information, which doesn't have mass, but you see it does have energy, just like light, you have this communication instantaneous channel available to you. And I believe all the psychic information, all the stuff that you're doing as well, comes through this reality now that everything is connected. You see, in some ways that's a spiritual concept as well. I mean, I don't know if we want to go there, but
I was just about to say, actually, you read my mind. I was going to say that the idea that we're all one gets said so often. I think people, especially in the West, don't even hear it anymore. But to me, that's what it sounds like you're talking about, is this interconnected, that thing that some, particularly of the traditional faith in the East would teach.
That is exactly correct. And I've been saying that for many years. In fact, sometimes I give a talk called Science and Spirituality, which makes exactly that point. And you see, if we can get to the next stage, science is terrific. It's not like you ever want to give it up. I mean, it's wonderful. But what you want to do now is get it balanced with this spirituality. And that's one of the objectives that this applied precognition project is all about. I mean, once you open up the window of precognition, you now are opening up this idea that we are all one, that everything is connected. I mean, what seems the furthest away from being connected actually isn't physical space, it is time. I mean, people might say, okay, well, there's some way there are waves on the other side of the world that we don't know about, and that's how you get a hold of it. A radio model, which in fact has been proven to be wrong. There are no waves like that. But time, the future, that's a different way of looking at the universe. That's a true paradigm shift. I think you know what I mean by that. That's a whole different way of looking at the universe. And that's why I believe precognition and the reality of precognition is so important. But how are we going to get society and scientists to pay attention. The scientific...
Experiments with repeatable results?
Say it again?
Experiments with repeatable results?
Yeah, but you see, that's why I am so frustrated. That has been done. That's the normal scientific method. And you have to kind of really appreciate that, because the scientists who have been doing just that are the most frustrated, because they're doing it and it's made some impact. I mean, there are some other scientists that are being drawn to this, but it's very, very slow. And society, I think the impact is also slow. I mean, you don't see much of it happening. And, well, but that's what we're about. We are now organized. Applied Precognition Project is a corporation, all volunteers, that is set up to educate society. And notice the word Applied Precognition Project. Our focus now is basically, if precognition is real, you ought to be able to, and in fact should, apply it to getting, and I'm going to use the word wealthy. Money turns off so many people, but money is part of it. But I want to use the word wealthy, because, wealth has a much deeper meaning than money. It includes health, for example. The original definition includes prosperity and like sharing with other people. That's what wealth did mean and still should mean. I mean, since we are all connected, if you come up with a way of accumulating wealth and are a prosperous person, it's very natural to share it since we're all connected. And it's in that context that we really are moving forward with applying our precognitive remote viewing approaches.
Do you find that you have the same degree of success directing remote viewing, the applied remote viewing, with this intention as you do when, say, maybe you're doing something totally unrelated to someone possibly making money or becoming more wealthy?
What a beautiful question. And I would have to say, now remember, we're just taking on big picture. We've been doing wagering at the level of sports, at the level of short-term individual predictions in the stock market, things like that. And people have made money. There's a guy on our website who published a paper where he made $150,000. Some of your readers may be in front of a computer, and they can go to appliedprecog.com, appliedprecog.com. And there's something there. The guy's name is, we call him Greg K because we can't pronounce his last name, Kolodziejewski. Anywhere he has examples, and there are lots of examples, including Hal Puthoff, who started all this with Russ Targ. He had someone come to him that wanted to fund a school, and they had a short-term project where they did just that. What we're doing, and there are some people who are clearly having to face up to deep embedded negative feelings about money. That's why we put this in the concept of wealth, because people who have a lot of money, they're terrible. In our society, they must have gotten it in some illegal way, or they're part of those stock brokerage guys that caused the major collapse of our economy for 8 years, or there's a rather negative feeling about people who have money, which might very well subconsciously stop you from doing real well to get money. And people have definitely experienced that.
Let me tell you why I asked the question, because there's sort of I don't know, an underground or usually not quite stated idea that floats around the psychic community, and I think sometimes it goes back at least as far as Edgar Cayce, if not further, where generally it's okay if you're reading or trying to help somebody else make money, especially if it's for a project like the school or something. But that often if you start trying to use it for yourself, a lot of times it backfires. And I've actually seen this happen to people. Now, maybe they are just self-sabotaging, but, and I think there are parameters on that. I mean, I charge for readings, but I also do some for charity. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't know. I think that may be where some of that comes from. I'm not sure if it's all just that people are negative about money. It's that there's this kind of idea. It's like the idea of karma that just sort of floats out there, and most people don't know what it means.
That is, God, I got so much I want to say about that. First of all, let me say a lot of our people who are doing this do just what they do. They give 10% or more of everything they earn to a charity of their choice. I think to help them get over this feeling which they know they have and is in them. But I want to say even more, because I know there are so many people who are doing good work with this psychic consciousness abilities that they have. Too often in the press we hear about the fraudulent psychics, and unfortunately they're out there, and they hurt those of you who are sincere and know that this capability exists and you're using it. But look at this. Those people, the good-willed psychics, are just the ones who ought to gather wealth with the intention of using it in a healthy way for society. And they're the best ones in a position to do that. Imagine a society where we had just the kind of people, the good-willed psychics, who now had a higher percentage of money and were distributing it in ways that made sense to them. Okay? I would be really happy to have these people being able to make decisions, even give to political parties. But, that's another one of those things. The guys who are giving to political parties that have all these money are terrible. Well, hey, they can do that. Why isn't it that more of us can do that as well? You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yes, I do. And I'm just thinking that was why I was a bit quiet.
Yeah.
Unusual for me, I know. But but yeah, no, it's more just I don't know, there's just kind of this in the water thing that not everybody has it, not everybody gets taught it, but this kind of, if you use your abilities for
Personal gain.
Personal gain, not to make a living so much, but in fact, Edgar Cayce at one point wound up, his wife came and said, you either have to start charging for readings, or I'm sorry, I'll have to take the kids home to mother because I can't feed them. And so he looked at what a doctor charged, and he charged about the same amount for the time.
And he was still successful.
Yes, but when he
was still just as successful.
But when he tried to use it for investing, some people came to him to invest in, I think it was a silver mine or a gold mine, and they had a very similar idea to yours, I think, but only more just directed. They were going to use Edgar Cayce's ability. And he would, of course, get some of the money, and some of it would go for a hospital, I think, and some of it would be. And every single time he would try to really do this, it's the one bunch of his readings that's completely wrong. Now was he self-sabotaging? I don't know.
Oh, that is so interesting. That's the first time I've heard that story about Edgar Cayce. That is fascinating. And you want to know something? None of us know why that happened with him. Was it self-sabotaging, whatever? And I will say just as you raised this question, this is one of the challenges. I don't believe it is built into the universe. I think it is built into many of us because of our upbringing. Hey, in India, we always used to think of the shamans there getting paid in chickens and stuff for helping people, right? I mean, look, the image of only doing it to help others, certainly not doing it to get rich, is out there. And it is one of the major things which anyone who's going to get involved in this who does want to get wealthy, and is going to have to grapple with. Now, maybe some people don't have that at all, but it's hard to believe that there isn't some element of that in there if they've been raised in a Western society, and in fact, even an Eastern society. I would like to read to you a definition of wealth, because I really think, as I say, the psychics of goodwill, and it may take work because there's deep stuff in there, but I think they can get to this. Okay, so here's a definition. Wealth is the abundance of valuable resources or material possessions. This includes the core meaning as held in the originating Old English word weal. Weal is a sound, healthy, or prosperous state. An individual, which is what we're focusing on, but the community, region, or country that possesses an abundance of such possessions or resources to the benefit of the common good is known as wealthy.
That's very interesting. The Germanic rune, which is also part of that same ancient tradition, Fehu, literally means cattle, but it also means fertility, health, well-being. Very similar. And of course, we also use the word wheel to when we're working in the context. I happen to practice the Old Norse, a revival of the Old Norse religion, which my listeners know that. And my husband would say, white and wheel for just what you're saying, you're talking about.
And okay, so and don't you see? Imagine if your listeners were to take on. And, this is a change. You have to be moved to do this, but take on working to get our society and to move to a new level where wealth, in the sense of sharing the wealth with society in a rather normal way now, because if people like your listeners are becoming wealthy, we come up with a way of doing that. And clearly the way I'm talking about is not the only way. There are other ways, but the intention of doing it and teaching others. We're all about teaching others how to do this so they indeed will use the wealth for the common good, and also teach others and bring others in. We see this as being a true grassroots effort, and we want to grow. And that's why we give workshops and things like that. In fact, our current workshop, you love the name, I hope. It's called Living Precognition, Creating Your Future, and subtitled Integrating Precognition into Your Life, in particular, the important connections with health and wealth.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
That was what I was going to ask you too, is the future fixed?
I've got a whole article I wrote in a company before this one, which was called Physics Intuition Applications at p-i-a.com. And if they go there, there's a place where there's a magazine and they can find articles on it. That is an excellent question, and maybe I'll use this as an opportunity to give you my sense of how time and consciousness work. First of all, consciousness is more fundamental than time and space. Consciousness is the source of everything. We are currently, and science is spending more and more time understanding what goes on in the brain when people think different things, and you can come up with how it affects the brain, which is physical. But notice the thought itself, the conscious experience that the person has itself, is what's fundamental. And the most fundamental, or at least one of the key fundamentals, is what I call the now moment. You've probably heard this in many different contexts. But the now moment, I'm pounding my desk now. This now moment, that experience is like the old atom sense of what they used to think in the Greek days, that there was a fundamental thing and then everything was made up of it. The now moment is like that. It is the fundamental atom. It is only in the now moment that free will exists. It's the only time that you can do anything. It's the time when your consciousness and your awareness is fully there. And if you think about it, that's really very, very special moment. We have memories of the past. You know what? Memories, as we all know, are faulty. I love the example of a car accident. You have 10 witnesses and you get pretty much 10 different stories with some overlap. The group process does work, but there are memories are faulty. The now moment is the key. Well, guess what? What we now know with precognition is you can have what I love to call future, memories of the future. Just like we have memories of the past, you can have memories of the future. That's precognition.
Is the memories of the future tend to be of things that make a particularly strong impression?
Well, just like memories of the past, I think the answer to that is yes. But remember, just like memories of the past, memories of the future are not perfect. And I think it's because of that predetermination is never like 100%. The universe works so that you were there when you created your past. You're going to be there when you come to the future. In fact, we, in our associative remote viewing, have you go to your own future when you know what the reality of the outcome is. That's the way we do it. And it's not 100%. And so predetermination it's just not the way, it's not one or the other. You have free will. Some stuff seems to be predetermined because when we get these wonderful, right on predictions of the future, you came back and gave that information, and it certainly feels like it was predetermined. You knew it happened. But it doesn't happen 100% of the time. And it's interesting that quantum mechanics, we talked about entanglement. That's one of the key principles. The second key principle in quantum mechanics is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Like built into the very fabric of nature is a certain level of uncertainty. And I think that's true with consciousness. And it allows for all kinds of creativity. It allows you to use your free will, participate mightily in your own future and the future of society, since we're all connected. And yet it's not, even though that's happening, it's not completely determined. It's a very creative kind of process. And the words begin to fail here.
I was gonna ask if I send my consciousness forward to view a now moment in what is my future. Aren't I, by interacting with that set of that particular concept, aren't I becoming entangled with who I am now, and thus we're having sort of a mutual back and forth flow? I'm just asking.
Absolutely. That was a beautiful way of putting it. And that's exactly what is happening. That is what entanglement is all about in the consciousness field.
Can you entangle the past in the same way?
Same way. Now, can you change the past? People always ask that. Can you change the future? I think that's almost irrelevant, because notice, what matters is your experience in the now. I mean, you had that experience. If you're starting to think about the past, you're doing memory of the past. Yes, you can entangle with it. You'll get information from the two things, but that it would in no way change the moment that went on in the past that's as strong as the moment that's going on right now. I mean, can you change your right now experience? It just is. There's nothing to be changed. It just is. However, you can entangle with it. That's the way the universe seems to work.
As a textile worker, I'm trying to get my yarn around this, basically.
You're not the only one. And this is the kind of stuff that I've been, and very happily, contemplating, meditating on, but now applying. And you look at all the data, the scientific data, you look at the fact that you psychics are picking up information, and I think it fits this model that I just outlined for you. And again, that's on our website, the p-i-aa.com website. And this is this kind of stuff we talk about at our conferences. And, we have an active discussion group. If they go, anybody who's sort of interested in this, the community, we have a discussion group at this appliedprecog.com place, and there's a contact link. Just, put your name and email in, and you can become part of that group.
Yeah, I have to say it's a very nice site. I was looking at it when I realized that I'd gotten the times wrong and we were time to start. But I just actually clicked on see discussion groups when I got the call. So, but I want to encourage my listeners, if you have any interest, really check out this website, because it's really interesting. And I think now that we've done some of the philosophy and the theory, and my head is spinning, and probably my listeners' heads are spinning, why don't we go back a bit to how the simple version of how applied remote viewing works? And we've done a little bit of that, but sort of like, what type of questions do you use it for? How do you use it? What is basic training, that kind of thing.
Okay. Very good. And on our website, in fact, I'm going to click on it now just so I can talk maybe about a specific example. On our website, at the very top, that top bar, you'll see there's something called ARV examples. ARV stands for Associative Remote Viewing. And the very first example there is fine, and there are many that are even better than this one, but this one is pretty good. It shows a picture, and then it shows the person's totally blind. All they were given were, in this case, a 6-digit randomly generated coordinate, and told to describe and sketch the photos. We call it a photosite, but let's just say photograph that they're going to see in the future, a couple of days from when they turn in their transcript. That is the one skill which is used the way we use it in associative remote viewing. So describe and sketch a photo that you're going to see in 2 days. Now, how is that one skill used? And here's where the term association comes in. The tasker, remember we talked about the tasker before? He's the one that gives this random coordinate. And what he does, he sets up 2 photographs, which are quite different, okay? The 2 photographs, he, the tasker, associates one photograph with, say, if it's a financial, up. If it's sports, it might be one team or another team. But let's talk financials because that's where our focus is now. So one photograph would be associated with some financial instrument, say the Dow Jones. We're using foreign exchange instruments now, but that instrument moving up. The other photograph, remember, which is quite different, is associated with the stock market or other financial going down. So one photo is associated with up, another photo is associated with down. Very different photos. Only the tasker knows that association. In fact, sometimes that association is actually done by a computer. That's what we're doing now. So nobody even knows what it is until the next step, the judging step. Now, so you've got these 2 photos. The remote viewer goes in. He's just given a 6-digit coordinate. He generates his transcript. The tasker then gets that transcript. He now looks at the 2 photos, and I'm looking at an example now where the person drew square, said square, also drew a circle, and wrote the word inside the circle. And this turns out to be a lamp, which is square on the outside, and has a circular bulb on the inside. And the sketches are really quite good in terms of their size and everything. So this is just one example. And I don't know what the other picture was, but let's just say it was a whale jumping out of the ocean or something like that. The judge would then say, obviously describing this photo, it was associated with up. Remember, he did that association before. How did the viewer get that? Well, he must be seeing it at his feedback time. And so we would be able to then put in a trade for up. That's associative remote viewing.
How does that work with something that's extremely manipulated like the stock market?
Well, see what this works with, which is anything which is random. So, it works, we use it with something that's usually considered random. But because at the end of the event, we know what happened. We know if the market moved up or down. In this case, it went in the correct, the predicted direction. So the viewer got back the picture which matched his transcript. We call this a transcript, right? His sketches. Had it gone the other way, he would have gotten a picture of the whale. One thing that everybody in the system knows is you're always going to get back what actually happened. And that's what makes it work, because the viewer gets feedback of what actually happened, And his task at remote viewing time was to describe his feedback.
It sounds like almost like you're assigning a photograph or a picture as a symbol for something else.
That's the association. That's right.
Okay.
It's a symbol for up or down. And you could think of it as a symbol. I have no problem with that at all. So it is a symbol. One symbol is for up. A very different symbol is for down. The remote viewer's task is to describe and sketch the symbol they will see in the future. And they do, in fact, that future comes within a few days. And he sees that symbol. And he or she will then be able to look at the picture, at their transcript, and say, oh, how well I did. Or maybe they didn't do that well, but they'll learn something, and they're ready then for the next one. Typically, our people do, 1 to 3 of these a week. Most do 1 or 2 a week.
This reminds me slightly of, you mentioned in another interview, the Oracle of Delphi.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm trained to do something very similar in a Norse context based on the Greenland Cirrus. And when I go into trance in these situations, usually there are people that ask me questions, and then I see pictures and I describe them.
Yep.
And it's striking me that this, because in order to do the remote viewing, if you have to learn to talk while you do this. You'd have to learn to take your pen and draw what's going into your mind, basically.
That's exactly right. And in the military, they sometimes, as an option, would have people just talk, and they'd have a recorder going. So because some people might get into a different kind of trance where they didn't want to even have to write, they would just describe what they were seeing. And another thing, it's not only visual. A lot of our viewers get sounds. I once had a great symbol, a great photograph of a beehive. And one of the viewers said, bzzz, I'm hearing a lot of bzzz, and wrote B-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z all over his paper. Other times you get smells. Other times you actually get feelings in your body, which might be related to the target. So consciousness has a way of using our full sensory capabilities to communicate from the target / symbol.
Yeah, I've experienced pretty much all of those things in trance. It's just usually I see pictures. But my husband, who is very word-oriented and actually thinks in words rather than pictures, he usually is told something.
And we have some wonderful transcripts that are just words. We say describe and sketch. Some people get the words come in, and all they do is write down their words. Most are actually a combination, like the one I'm looking at here, and we have, I don't know how many, we have so many examples on our site, but this one is a mixture, and that's how most of them come. Most of them come with some sketches and some words. And in ARV, oh my, there's one here of a rocket. Oh, I hope your listeners go and look at this. There's some wonderful examples. And these are not by what would be considered the best remote viewers in the world. These are people just like you all, who just do this. Once you open yourself up and go in, this is a natural skill.
I mean, it just sounds to me like you're taking this ability, which is used by a lot of practitioners in a similar way, but you're focusing it very narrowly to get very, very concrete type of results. I mean, it either is or it isn't what is being shown.
Well, and that's where the judging comes in. Remember, the tasker gets to see this, and at the time, all he sees are the transcripts and the 2 photos. And it's his job to make a judgment. Is it really close enough that I believe this was psychic information on one side or the other? So that's a yes or a no for one side or the other, and then he'll make an up or down prediction. Or sometimes he could say, you know what? I don't think they made a psychic connection. We understand that there are probabilities involved here and there are uncertainties, and so then they'll just pass. So the tasker.
I was going to ask what happens, because sometimes I get a blank. It's like there is no message.
And that would be a pass here, and roughly a third of the time in our experience has been passes. That's just our experience on average with most of our viewers, and it varies from viewer to viewer. But notice, we are with every prediction getting data. And so we get data for each viewer, which is useful to the viewer to improve, and to the analyst, to the tasker, to improve the analysis on that person. Maybe some people don't like certain kinds of targets. Well, we have data on that. I would hope you and some of your listeners would just become part of this. You're just the kind of people we're looking for.
Which is kind of actually refreshing, because I have to say, again, when I was listening to your couple of your other interviews and a little bit of your webinar, which is up there that people can also go listen to on YouTube, I was thinking, I really like this man, because, again, when I've helped interview other remote viewers, not all of them, but a couple of them in particular, it was like they were like really dissing, that's a natural psychic, but we're trained. And I'm like, but we're doing it differently. And I can see how there are advantages in some ways to some of what you're doing for specific tasks.
Right.
But I don't think it means that we're not doing anything.
No, exactly the opposite. You're tapping into the same consciousness information field. I call it the UCC. It's a universe of collective consciousness.
Now, when you say consciousness, you don't mean just sapient beings here or even animals. You mean like even my printer?
I don't know about your printer. I'll be real clear. I'm not clear on the printer. I am clear on sentient beings, because I will be willing to say that sentient beings have consciousness. Frankly, people who I have great respect for say it does go down to the mineral level. So yes, your printer would have consciousness too. And maybe that's why psychokinesis and stuff like that works, because you're one with your printer. So I could easily...
Sorry, my printer and I do not get along. In fact, it's going to be leaving soon. But I used to drive my bosses crazy when I worked in the office, because I would talk to my computers and stuff. I don't know if they really have consciousness, but I do feel things like mountains, or the ocean, or the great sort of old ones seem to have a presence, definitely.
Yeah, and once you go that far, I must say, you heard the way I answered the question the first time, and so I put some uncertainty in there. But there's a pretty strong argument that if consciousness is the fundamental, the physical world, space and time, came from this consciousness field, and it's feeding back and forth, it would say, yeah, if minerals, water has consciousness, and sure, when it gets into an ocean, maybe there's a higher level. A mountain has a higher level that's easier for us mere mortals with our consciousness to entangle with. But, there's this concept of an entanglement strength that I've actually talked about and written about. And so, but at the level of zero versus some, I would say right now my sense is your printer probably has a low level of consciousness.
I think so. And probably what it does have has been put there by my yelling at it. Actually, that brings up another topic of thought forms that I wondered if you had the thing to say about that.
Same sort of, you're asking wonderful questions, and hey, I'm very quick to tell you these are the kind of questions that you don't quite know, certainly at the level that I know my consciousness right now, but I can give you my beliefs and feelings about it.
Which is what I'm asking.
Exactly. Thought forms are real. I know many, many people. In fact, there's a guy named Joe Gallenberger who is going to be at our conference in New Orleans. who makes them. You get a whole bunch of people, you get them together, and you can form something in the middle of a circle, that has its own reality. You can affect light. Well, in fact, we saw that. We did something called Music from the Fringe, and we trained some cellists to do remote viewing, and when it was and they were great at it, and they actually made music which came through this. I won't go into the details, but if you Google Music from the Fringe, you'll be able to find it. But in that presentation, a woman actually held a neon bulb and got it to light up. So, it's not, well, maybe it is a thought form that went in and put energy into the bulb and lit it. So, yes, I believe in thought forms.
Or that you believe that people can create that sort of thing, either intentionally or unintentionally. Because sometimes with clients, it's like they've unintentionally created a thought form. Like, and I'm joking, but I'm actually quite serious as well. I mean, it's not a serious situation, but my printer has just been a mess since I got it.
Uh-huh. Huh.
And at this point, I have probably projected a personality of an ornery child onto it. It didn't have that to begin with. It's just metal parts and
that's
parts
right. No,
but
hey, I believe that. One of the psychics in the military, in the Army psychic unit, Lynn Buchanan is his name. He got chosen because he brought down a whole computer system. They blamed him. They blamed him for that, but they said, if this guy can do this, we want him in our remote viewing unit.
We won't talk about what I did to the mainframe at one of my offices. This
So
resulted
yes.
in the other secretary screaming, "I hate it when you do that. Stop!" Because when I said, either come up or crash, I don't care, and it went crash. I went,
It's good that we can laugh about this, because one of the things which I think is so important as we move forward to this kind of new world, new paradigm world we're talking about, we kind of envisioning, it's got to be fun to get there. And,
it does.
And we have to make it as much fun as possible. But I must say, unfortunately, I can't get over the thought form that all paradigm shifts have been rather chaotic in the past. And I'm working to try to make it minimally chaotic. But
well, there's a number of things transferring, though, all at once. I think that probably this transformation is also, it's accompanied by some rather physical manifestations. I mean, my husband has pointed out that the internet, for example, he's a writer, or he was making his living full-time as a writer, and now he's studying to be a doctor. And one of the reasons is because the publishing industry has been made so crazy because of all of the changes that it's very hard to make a living right now. Well, the same thing happened 500 years ago when they invented the printing press.
Mm-hmm.
And it took about 100 years for things to fall out. I don't know that it will take that long this time, but that's just one of many, many things that are all sort of converging together to make everything shifting, I think.
Yep, I totally agree. And technology is moving ahead so fast. The Internet's an interesting example of technology almost mirroring what the conscience field does. And maybe this is how it eventually arose. Think about it. The fact that you can be in almost instant communication with someone on the other side of the world with the Internet is a little bit like telepathy. You can show, pictures, you can share words, you can put your camera on and you can see each other. It's sort of like a little bit like telepathy. And I just find that I like to look at it that way, that technology is catching up with what the consciousness field was always able to do, which was instant communication.
Well, there's the old adage about I think it was Arthur C. Clarke. I'd have to look it up, but I think it was Arthur C. Clarke that said, anything that is sufficiently advanced for you to not understand it is magic.
Yes,
Technology.
I don't know if you, but yes, that's a wonderful quote. That's a wonderful quote. And yes, that's exactly right. And that's right. And a lot of people would consider what we're talking about as being magic because they don't believe it. It's not in their belief system at all.
Well, Edgar Cayce was asked if science would ever study these fields, and he said yes, but it would be a long time, and this was in the 1930s, I believe. So it depends on what you define a long time as. But I'm glad. I think it is happening, and I'm very glad to see it.
It is. It is happening, and part of what we're doing is to have it happen more and more, including science and others. We have. The Applied Precognition Project has a written mission. In fact, let me go here and let me read it to you. It's on our website. Do you mind?
Oh, no, I was going to ask you to actually before we left, so please do.
Okay. Our mission is Applied Precognition Project's mission is to publicly explore, research, and apply logic. Wait, let me read that again. Applied Precognition Project's mission is to publicly explore, research, and apply logic and intuition emotion to predict future event outcomes, enabling participants to evolve personally while contributing to the elevation of global consciousness. That's what we're about.
That's really cool.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes to define in relatively few words what you're about, but that's what we're doing, and it feels really good to be doing that. I'm retired now, and as I've said, my whole career was predicting using what was then the current scientific models, and now I'm predicting what I hope will be future scientific models, which will include things like precognition and consciousness fields and all the stuff that you do. Science one day, I believe, will be able to explain it. I think it's going to be in a very different fashion, though, but there will be a much deeper understanding of it.
Oh, that's really, really, really interesting. I'm sort of without words here because you really did do such a good job defining it. I did want to just ask really quickly, what if somebody wanted to use? Do you provide like services? Would like a member of the public or a corporation like approach you with a question or a task, or how does that work?
We would certainly engage in a conversation with someone. We've had people who wanted to hire our best psychics, and we will do that. So we will do that. What we would prefer is to have them come in and learn it and do it for themselves. We think the best way to proceed is for this truly to be grassroots and have it distributed among many, 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 many people. However, we will certainly engage with individuals and corporations because this is going to become a profession. The people who are best at it will be professionals, and they may want to do it for their own path towards wealth, but maybe they feel it is actually better to just get hired as an individual. And so we're open to doing all of those things.
And finally, on a totally different topic, this is just kind of fun, but
Okay.
You mentioned in one of your interviews that you'd been a little bit involved in something that you haven't figured out quite how to do yet, but that would be earthquake prediction. And I know you're in Southern California, and I was born
Right.
I live in Ireland now, but I was born in Long Beach, and Long Beach, California, and so was my father. And so I have an innate connection to California and to earthquakes. And I just was curious as to what you've come up with, or if anything.
We're a long way from being able to doing earthquakes. Our focus now is on what's called binary. Okay, so it's up or down, yes or no, that sort of thing. To do an earthquake, realistically, where it would be applied, you need more, mathematically and scientifically we call it bits of information. So not just 0 and 1. You would need to know a location within California. But okay, so you could say, okay, I'm happy if I could limit it to 20 locations, maybe 10 on the San Andreas Fault and other places in California where the epicenter is going to be. But then I also have to know when. And I also need to know something about the magnitude. I mean, there are earthquakes every single day. So we're talking about maybe, of low magnitude. Okay, so say you're asked a question which is over magnitude 6. Okay, so that's a bit. Over magnitude 6 or not. Or do you want to ask about the big one? But let's say not. But you can see now what you're talking about is maybe 50 to 100 pieces of information. To do something like that would require, and you could even do it with ARV, you need 100 pictures which are very different, and you would need remote viewers which could get very, very specific about that. But and maybe if you had many of them, you could come up with a confidence level. Remember this uncertainty factor that I was talking about? I think the best you could do would come up with a confidence level of maybe 80%, 90%. Maybe you get really good 95%. It's never going to be 100%, I don't believe. And in something like 10, 20 years from now, I think we might even be able to do that, because I hope we will have a collection of viewers with a history that were good enough that we might be able to do something like that.
See, if I were asked a question like that, I would have many of the same constraints, but I would say, okay, well, where are we looking to see if there's an earthquake? Let's put it down to, say, the Bay Area or the Los Angeles area or the Valley or something. And then I would have to ask, okay, and then again, above what magnitude are we talking about? What do we care? And then and then a time period. I'll usually say something like, when I do my current events ratings, what are the energies around a potential earthquake 6.0 or greater in the Los Angeles area in the next 6 months? And then I would cast the runes and read the cards. And sometimes you get kind of just we are not giving you a message, we will not answer you. This is the totally scattered one. But a lot of the time there's usually a pretty definite, particularly with the runes, which tend to be really in touch with kind of the older powers. You'll get something that's, if I got Hagalash, for example, which is hail strike, I'd say it's pretty likely. But if I get Isa, which is ice, I'm going to see that the fault is probably still stuck. Now, it's not perfect. I'm not right all the time, but if it combines with that and people starting to crave popcorn and animal sightings, family pets running away and stuff and things, and then if somebody started reporting, the wells and things changing, I would start reinforcing my bookshelves.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Have you kept records on this? How many times have you done it? How many times you're successful? Because when you do this, if it's ever really going to be used, I believe you have to say, with some background to support it, that I think there's going to be an earthquake. I think it's going to be in the Bay Area. I think it's going to be sometime in March, and I think it's going to happen with the probability of 80%.
For until last year when my mother suddenly passed away, I was keeping a web blog for about 3 years, and I'm hoping to go back to it. Where, yeah, I mean, I did the cards of the day most days, and I did current events readings, and I would, even I'd say, this looks like I got it wrong. Or sometimes the one that really kind of almost scared me was I had this feeling one morning of just, something wrong in the sea. I can't go into all the cards and stuff, but basically it felt like disaster under the sea. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the news. And then 6 months later, the Russians admitted this was not the one everybody knew about. They lost a second nuclear submarine. And I went back and looked at my weblog, and there was nothing that day, but it was the day after. So I think it's very important to keep. I don't keep meticulous records like a scientist, no, but I do think that it's important to be public. Otherwise, for both your hits and your misses.
That's exactly right. And before we can get to earthquakes or something, which is complicated because it's got so many bits of information. I think there'll be a lot of other questions short of that will be of interest. Using this associative remote viewing technique, or also just, the remote viewers came up with timelines, techniques, where they would move their finger along a timeline, and they would get a feeling on when they thought something was going to happen. As you well know, there are a lot of other techniques. However, what I don't believe has been done for any of these kind of really practical applications is in that application, like earthquakes, and that's what I mean by an application to something like earthquakes, you have to do it in that application. It's almost like you'd have to build up a database for earthquakes, because you might be able to do something different very well, but might not be able to do earthquakes. Until you get data, you won't know. And that's why a lot of these kinds of questions, before you're going to get a agency to act on it, you're going to have data. Otherwise, they're just going to laugh at you. And this is one of the reasons we're starting with financial, because we can get data every day, and we can get people interested. And as we get more and more people interested, some of them are very naturally going to move out into other areas, keeping data.
Okay. I've had a question from 2 different people I read for at different times of my career. And I'm wondering how you would use associative remote viewing for this, or could you? And in both cases, I won't read for the outcomes of horse races, but I have gotten twice now asked by people who are horse breeders, should they buy a particular horse or not? And having grown up with horses, I can kind of connect to that. And it's been very interesting to see. I haven't gotten the feedback yet of whether, the decision turned out to be right or wrong, but that strikes me as the kind of thing where, should you buy something or should you not? What is the future of this animal in terms of being a champion?
That's a wonderful binary question, yes or no. And if the breeder were to define that, okay, I mean, should you buy it, shouldn't you buy it? Well, what does he mean by that? He has to have a pretty good fix on that. Will the horse still be around and running for 2 years and doing well, and have to define well? But to the extent that he can do that, that would be a great one to give to a group of gifted ARVers, because it's binary. It's a yes or no. So I would love that.
Yeah. To call up just out of the blue and say, will you help me pick my rate? I've got a choice at, buy or not buy this horse. And sure, we'll give it a go. That's what we would say as well. And we might be able to go a little further and give a sense of a probability based on how good the match was. Also, we may be able to do something like that several times, just like you could. I mean, you could do it one day and then you could ask the same question. Or how do you feel about that? Asking the same question different times? Did you think repeating it is helpful or not? I have found repeating a question is usually, it depends on if circumstances change, which is why I asked you about the future, because I get, of course, a lot of psychics, particularly psychic intuitives, a lot of what I get are relationship questions. And it takes two people in that relationship. And I often get visited by people, especially young women, who have their eye on a particular young man, and they don't like the answer the cards are giving, so they make me answer again and again. They look at it a different way. And finally, I just get this jumble of stuff, and I'll say, the 8-ball is now closed.
Okay, and I understand that, and in fact, I agree with it. It turns out I asked you the question because I got recently asked that question, and I believe you can ask a group of people to get one answer, but once you ask the question once, you should stop, because if you ask it again, and remember, the future is connected to the past, so when you ask the question once, you want to go in with confidence asking that question and knowing that that's it. You guys are the ones who are taking this question on, and do it. And do it knowing you've got the skills to do it, and you're going to give a high probability answer.
Well, also, though, I will look at the same question again. I tell people to come back in 6 months, because it just seems to me that things can change. And that may be where we differ a little bit, and that's why I see time more as kind of a river, and there's a lot of different ways it could branch out, and especially when you're dealing with human beings who make choices. As I tell my clients, for example, if they're having a relationship problem, it takes two people to make a relationship. You can't decide for the other person, and there's even card figurations that will tell me this person doesn't know what they're going to do. They haven't made a decision. And I'll have to say, well, we can't really get the final outcome until we make a decision. You're suggesting that there is always a final outcome, and it hasn't been my experience, but I'm doing a different technique.
No, we don't differ as much as you think. And let me explain that. There is a final outcome, and that is when the time in the future you're talking about happens. You see, the now that you're experiencing is not going to change. The entanglement with it, from what we call the future, it has different characteristics and probabilities when you look at it at different times, because this universe of collective consciousness has sort of a reality of its own, and when you touch it, and when you look at it at different times, it seems to me that it's perfectly reasonable to expect it'll entangle with you in different ways, and you will pick up its different probabilities. And when you're looking is one of the aspects of the entanglement. So that doesn't contradict the fact that when the moment comes, it will have a unique consciousness interaction with the conscious being that's experiencing it. So it's a little more complicated than just saying it change. See, it's the moment, the atom that you experience won't change, but when you touch it from any other time than the now, then it's got, even quantum mechanics would describe that as having a probability field, because it hasn't happened yet in the now.
And what I found is the more people or beings, sometimes I read for animals like, kitty cats or whatever, the more beings with conscious decision you bring into it, the more complicated it gets. And sometimes it's still real obvious because, like you said, there are some events or some things that, if I get the destiny card, or one of the runes that sort of signifies that, it probably means it's definitely, it's going to happen. And people can choose how they deal with it. That's the Germanic view of will versus weird. Weird is what is going to happen, and will is how you choose to meet it. So, there's that as well.
Yes. And all of these things are entangled together. I love that you brought up that word because it's a very significant word.
Well, I'm a weaver and a spinner and a knitter, and the idea of entangled threads just makes sense to me. That you could, I could throw a thread out, or my cat could grab a ball of yarn and loop it around the table, and suddenly that's connected to my sweater.
Mm-hmm.
We've entangled each other.
I have a wonderful picture of a cat entangled in thread. I mean, you just described the picture I have, a cute little kitty. And I've talked about entanglement after putting that picture up. So
I think I know I think if it's a photo that floats around the internet, I think I know which one it is.
yeah,
because people send it to me all the time with, "There you are, Melody. There you are." Yep, that's me. Kitty all tangled. Well, I think this has been a really, really great interview. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we go?
Well, I really would invite your listeners to go to appliedprecog.com, nose around. If they're interested in just becoming, even at just the level of following what we're doing, click on the contact link and join us and follow what's going on and participate. And we'd love you to go even further and join groups that are doing predictions. And we have webinars discussing all of this. All of this is, all this is free. If you get more interested and are more interested, we would love you to join us in New Orleans, and you can meet the players in this field, many of them who were, in fact, actively doing the work for the CIA, etc. So that's in June. So hopefully you can join us and increase our circle of people who are interested in applying precognition.
New Orleans would be a very interesting atmosphere, I have to say. We didn't get into ghosts or anything like that, but I have to say New Orleans is right up there with parts of London, places I'm really not real comfortable.
One of our nights is going to be with a person who takes us around to just those places, and including voodoo. So you talked about thought forms. Isn't that what voodoo is all about? Well,
voodoo and Santeria, and yeah, they do a lot of work with thought forms, but they're also, all the Afro-Caribbean traditions also do a lot of work with trance, and I've been to a couple of bimbays and stuff, so I'm aware of that. When we were first learning to try to revive the Norse trance traditions, there's one passage in one saga of what goes on, and that's all we have. And so we went and studied and watched people who did similar things, but in other religious contexts. And of course, voodoo, and particularly in Santeria, which is a sort of a more Catholicized version, but it's basically the same sort of worldview. So it's quite interesting, yeah. And they get some interesting thought forms, I have to say. And New Orleans is sort of its own interesting thought form. I went to school in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, so I used to go and sit on the river and play guitars late at night in the French Quarter.
Well, you know so much more about all of these other forms of applying consciousness than I do, and I would love to get these communities to overlap a lot more.
Well, they do in some places. It's just that what I'm seeing is that there's not been a lot of overlap between remote viewing community and what I would call possibly both the non-broken traditions like Santeria or Voodoo, and the revival traditions like neo-paganism and other forms of sort of basically religious-based revival spirituality that also tend to involve either magic or thought form or when I was first studying paganism, learning tarot cards and learning these sorts of things were just part of what you did. Mm-hmm. Not everybody was really good at it, but it was just part of the training. And it would be nice I think it would be nice if more, not just religions, but more, if they taught that in public school, it might be a different world.
That's where we're headed, hopefully. Because obviously with this new paradigm shift we're talking about, where this is understood and appreciated more, it'll be natural to teach people this as children. It'll just be natural.
And the thing is that people don't get taught it as children. I have a a dear friend that I actually helped raise. I had her when she was like 6 and 7, 8 years old, and she was very, very, very psychic, almost to the point of being scary. And like a lot of people, she just sort of shut down, and she's in her approaching 40 now, and she just wrote me to say, that she was starting to have, things were starting to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started talking about things, and we should probably close pretty soon, but maybe some other show, if you want to come back, we could talk about things like if you do things like shielding and protection and stuff like that. But I gave her some exercises, and she wrote me and said, I'm sleeping now. And, it would just have been nice if she hadn't had to skip all those years.
Yep. Well, that's exactly right. And I hope people like that will come and join us, because obviously she's opening up. That means she'll have the talent again. And we'll see. Look, this was a real pleasure.
Your website. Yeah, it's been great, and I want to thank you for being here. And like I say, you're welcome back anytime you'd like to come on the show.
Okay, and let's do that.
Great. Well, we'll plan on that at some point. We'll be in touch. Meanwhile, I want to thank all my listeners for being here this evening, and I want to thank you for showing up to Cat's Eye on the Future. See you next time.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.